Welcome back with a smiling face. Important note before starting, if you are a fan of audio stories, then our Patreon account is the best platform for you. Join us on Patreon for the best audiobooks ever. Luna's Resurgence. Episode 2. Chapter 7-13. Nick POV. The night was bothering him too much. The room he had been placed in, thought was very nice and comfortable, was not soundproof. Not only could he hear his beta and that redhead, who was clearly really enjoying herself, he too could hear what was going on in other rooms on the first floor. It had gotten him out of bed and driven him outside, which he now realized was even worse, as now he could also smell all the wolves that were out here having s*x, he thought to himself, and stalked off into the woods, and away from the main pack AR. The further away he got, the easier it was to tune out all the s*x crazed unmated wolves. He was casually strolling deep in the eastern part of the territory, thinking about settling down out here to sleep, when he heard a fight going on. His ears pricked up, a viscous fight at that. He headed in that direction, towards the border, looking to see if he could assist in any way. He could use the distraction, smelled rogues, and picked up his pace. Came across two wolves unshifted, one a rogue and the other patrol, and stepped in to assist and help take down the beast. The warrior patrolling the area thanked him. "Why didn't you alert your alpha to this?" "No need. Rogues are normal to wander in on mating balls, they smell the high amounts of arousal on the wines and it attracts them. We just deter, or kill if need be. Keep a tally for the night," he'd laughed. "There's even a pool on who'll get the most kills tonight. Mind you, our alpha doesn't agree to us running into danger to win it." "What's the count?" Nick asked, more out of curiosity about the amount of rogues. He didn't approve at all about seeing who got the most kills in. He watched the man's eyes glaze over for about a minute. "Northern border got 2 rogues dead, 3 diverted back into the woods. Southern nil at all, haha, they are annoyed. Here on the eastern, me and the boys have seen half a dozen rogues prowling about, but that's the only kill, we've diverted the rest away so far. Western patrol, however, 3 kills by 1 patrolling wolf alone. She's our backup if we get into trouble, real trouble." That got his attention. "Yeah, high-ranked warrior and her wolf Kyra is a mean killing machine. You want a wolf on your side, it's Kyra. Okay, but if she's on the other side of the pack, how is that helpful to you?" He was a bit confused. The warrior laughed. "Kyra is really fast, take her maybe 30 minutes to get here. And like I said, only if we're in real trouble. Actually, she's primed to come here. Those half dozen are still prowling and we're expecting them to team up and try and break the border, likely end of shift, mangy critters but not dumb. That they are, all instinct. If you don't mind, I'll stick around and help out." "I don't mind, a big like yourself might just scare 'em off," he laughed. Nick smiled at him. "How old are you?" 24, but well trained, don't you worry, I got my wolf at 15. "Nice." Nick nodded. He wandered along the border with his new-found friend Denny. He was a happy young man, been mated since he was 19 and had 3 pups already and a 4th on the way. Claimed he just couldn't keep his hands off his mate, and she was twice when pregnant. Nick just shook his head and laughed at him. To which he'd been told, "You wait and see, once you find your mate, all you'll want to do is bed out of her." Nick couldn't help but like the man, and he only talked respectfully about his mate. That was nice. His father had never had anything nice to say about any of the women he marked, mated, and rejected for another. Though he could see, in his pack, wolves were never more happy when mated to their fated mate. Maybe his father just was never happy because none of his mates were fated to him, he'd chosen them all. It was unlikely he would know either already, having made the decision not to choose a mate in 5 years. They saw many rogues prowling out there, keeping their distance. He was not about to go running off into rogue territory to start a fight, and it seemed none of the patrolling warriors were going to either. It was obvious the rogues were building in numbers and an attack was imminent. Border Patrol was gathered watching the rogues. They now numbered 12 and were prowling back and forth. He'd let out a warning growl, Rip using all his alpha powers, so they knew there was an alpha here to defend the border. Kyra's on her way, one of the other patrollers yelled when the rogue numbers were at 15. It was an hour before dawn now, and it was definitely game on. The rogues were no longer prowling but all standing like they were waiting on something before launching an attack, but who knew what the mangy critters were thinking. A snarl came from one of them some time later, and it was suddenly on. All 15 of them charged the border. He was here with just 4 warriors, none of whom, once he shifted, he could communicate with. 5 to 15, not good odds. The fighting was brutal. Rip had shifted him right away. He was big and strong, and most wolves would back away from him. But not rogues, unfortunately. All primal and aggression, they didn't care. Their bloodlust once took hold was all they could think about. And tonight they were being driven by their need to mate like crazy. He didn't know when Kyra appeared, only that there was suddenly a very large and sleek-looking grey wolf in the fight. Ripping rogues from pack wolves' backs and slamming them on the ground to rip out their throats. This wolf was ripping and tearing into anything that was a rogue, taking down rogues like they were nothing. At one point even Rip stopped fighting to watch the large grey beast. His ears were up and he'd tried to catch her scent even. Odd behavior for in the middle of a fight. All 15 wolves were killed, none left alive. The one that had tried to leave injured, the big grey wolf had gone after on her own and killed it with an aggressive bite to his neck. It had shaken the wolf it had in its jaws, flicked it up and smashed it down onto the ground and proceeded to rip its throat out. He was watching, as was Rip and all the patrolling warriors. The wolf turned and headed back to pack territory. Rip was watching intently, his interest piqued. Nick had never seen Rip interested in a female wolf before. The wolf looked right at his as it slowly stalked past. Rip had stood to his full height to show his power as an alpha wolf, proud of it. Practically preening at her, Nick realized. The grey wolf just bared her teeth at him, a low snarl with it, and then continued to walk on by. Border Patrol gave her a wide berth and let her pass. She was definitely respected, he could see that, and he could see why. Rip tracked her till she was out of sight. Only then was Nick given back control and found the clothes he'd removed. Put them on and linked his beta to get his ass out of bed and meet him out the front of the pack house, to bring a wet towel to clean himself off and some clean pants. Jeremy was there by the car as instructed, dressed and looking bright as a daisy. Nick's eyes caught movement across the way while he was using the wet towel to clean his chest and abdomen down. There she was, Kyra, walking out from around the side of the pack house. Wow, check that out! Jeremy gasped, seeing her for the first time. She was an impressive wolf. Already seen it, female warrior. Nick nodded but didn't take eyes off of her. He could also feel Rip watching her, pushing forward. Must be some large she-wolf. Jeremy smirked. Hope she's a redhead. Nick glared at him for a moment, then turned his attention back to the grey wolf in question. The sun was up and he was actually getting a good look at her for the first time. All dark grey, not a speck of any other color, definitely could be mistaken for a black wolf of a night. Even a young alpha wolf, he supposed, but he already knew different was a high-ranked warrior. He watched as the wolf strolled to the house right next to the park, stopped and shifted right out the front by the door, to his complete shock. The human she-wolf that contained the mighty beast was so very tiny, maybe 5'6", had pale white skin and long black hair that fell to her waist. She was standing side on, her eyes moved to him. He was watching her and his wolf was all at attention as well. Very odd behavior again. Rip pushed forward a little more to use his alpha sight to get a clearer picture. watched her roll her eyes at them before going inside her house and closing the door. Curvy yet athletic Jeremy smiled. Shame she's not a redhead. He wiggled his eyebrows suggestively. Nick glared at him again and Rip growled at him softly, a little menacingly, surprising both. He had Jeremy. Jeremy's eyes went wide. Something I should know about here, Nick. Don't be stupid. Nick shook his head, but even he had to admit his wolf was acting very strange. Was curious about Kyra like nothing he'd ever been before. The minute he had seen Kyra he'd tried to scent her, and now too peering at her human counterpart and growling at his beta over a single comment on her appearance. What is it, Rip? He asked his wolf. Disrespectful beta, he'd replied, and prowled off to the back of Nick's mind, his tail flicking furiously back and forth. Nick shook it off and let it go. Chapter 8. Lucinda POV. Well rested, fed, and dressed in her retrieval gear, her bow slung on her back, Lucinda grabbed the two smaller cases on her kitchen table and headed into the pack house. She wouldn't normally train the twins fully kitted out, but today was a special day, and she already had permission from Alpha Corey to do so. As long as he got to see the pictures. Today she had a surprise for the girls. Today they would get their very first real compound bow, one each of course. To keep with them always, to practice with at will. When she was not here to train them, she couldn't wait to show them their gifts. They had been asking now for 6 months. Gabby and James had finally agreed to it and let Lucinda know without telling the girls. Lucinda had been very happy, had gone off to have Manny create the bows tailored to the girls' size. She used her boot to knock on the Gamma suite door. It was opened by Lauren, who squealed at the sight of Lucinda, in her outfit, and then her eyes moved to the two cases, and she was yelling for her sister Simone, screaming about bows. Simone came from a room opposite the living room. The two of them started jumping up and down, screaming with excitement now too. They had both turned 8 while she had been away, and these were actually their gifts. Inside the suite, Gabby waved her in and motioned to the fact she was kitted out fully. Why the kit out? Got permission from the Alpha, for the girl's birthday. Plus got someone to annoy. She'd smirked, thinking about that big BD who'd called her a mutt. She had won their knife-throwing duel on their last encounter, and she wanted him to be reminded of his loss. He was an alpha and she had bested him. It amused her and Kyra to no end. Seeing that he was here for the mating ball, they had decided to remind him of his loss. You must be talking about Alpha Nicholas. She nodded. He thought I was you last night. Lucinda saw Gabby visually shudder. Scared the goddess out of me. I'd leave that one alone if I were you. What did he do to you? Lucinda frowned. She didn't like the sound of the encounter, and she was not about to stand around and let an alpha be cruel to her friend. Nothing really. Stepped right up to me and demanded, and I apologized to him. He expects me to apologize for what exactly? Lucinda frowned. She had nothing to apologize for. The man was lucky he was still breathing. He should be thanking her for not putting that arrow through his heart, or I for that matter. She had just been doing her job. Nothing to apologize for. Kyra snorted. He's PD off. You beat him. Lucinda agreed. Well, that can't win everything. There is always someone out there better. She handed the cases over to the girls now that they had finally calmed down, were waiting patiently for their gifts, all calm-like. She watched them open the cases and start screaming all over again. For inside the cases were not just their bows but little black matching outfits that were very similar to hers. Well, go put them on, she encouraged them. So we can go train. They were off like a shot to their room. Did you really have to? Gabby laughed at her. I did, I really did. Lucinda laughed back at her. Come on, so cute, all three of us running around in black, sporting bows. She grinned right at her friend. Good family picture opportunity, hey. I'll get my phone. Use mine. Lucinda smiled, she wanted the pics on her phone. Gabby took her phone and once the girls were all dressed, they stood with their bows and posed in lots of different way. While Gabby took lots of photos, she sent a few to her own phone and to James's as well. Lucinda insisted on one to the alpha, explained she'd promised him seeing as he was allowing her to train them, all kitted out today. Lucinda headed off with the girls to the training ground. They were so darn cute in their little matching outfits carrying their bow cases. Lucinda sighed, she loved them so much, she was glad Gabby and James had accepted them. The two little girls before her were so happy, Lucinda didn't know if she could have raised them to be so happy. Yes, she loved them to bits, but sometimes looking at them brought back that dreadful day and made her so very sad. She walked, they ran once outside. As she walked past the Hummer she'd seen that, she now knew his name. Alpha Nicholas, standing next to watching her this morning, Kyra surged forward and clawed down the driver's side door in several places, puncturing around the door handle, and then continued to walk past, dragging her claws all the way down the rest of his car. What are you doing? Call me a mutt, she'd snarled. I'll act like one, then she had chortled. Oh, you are going to get us into so much trouble. Lucinda shook her head and looked around. Thankfully no one was watching them to identify it was her. And she chuckled as well. I think he deserved it too, sized up Gabby and scared her. Her wolf was unpredictable at times, a law unto herself. Calling Kyra a mutt was not nice. Then the way his wolf had stood up to tower over her, a show of dominance this morning. Then finding out he had frightened Gabby, it was not particularly surprising to Lucinda, that Kyra found an amusing way for them to pay him back for all the insults. Kyra had bared her teeth and snarled at his wolf this morning, showed him she didn't care for his display of power. He was not her alpha. We were not required to bow down to him or his wolf, and now she was really showing him how much she too could be disrespectful to another wolf. Disrespect. Deserves disrespect. Lucinda agreed. Halfway through training she could feel eyes upon her and turned her attention in the direction she felt it come from. Saw watching her from the corner of the pack house, his beta next to him, Alpha Nicholas, Gabby had said. Go ahead and watch, she thought, and turned away and continued to train and instruct the twins, who were now dressed as she was. They had been training with her for 2 years now, and knew what to do. How to follow her lead, and they paid attention, eager to learn. New bows took some getting used to, she was here today helping them to get used to their new weapon. Fine-tune them and learn to use them correctly, make those tiny adjustments so they were better fitted to the girls. Kyra's hearing picked up the word mud again, a snarl erupted from her, her whole body stilled. Lucinda tapped both girls on the shoulder, she retrieved her own bow from her back, stepped in front of them so they could watch her and follow. Notched an arrow, the girls mimic her actions exactly. Then she turned and looked directly at him, brought her bow around and aimed her arrow right at him. Call me a mutt again. I dare you, she and Kyra snarled right at him. Both girls were also aimed at him, she knew his enhanced alpha hearing would have caught her words. She watched as his beta put a hand on his alpha's shoulder, who was taking a step forward. He'd realized her intent, it was not a challenge she was offering, it was a direct threat that if he called her a mutt once more, she would put an arrow in him regardless of who he was. Lucinda knew she couldn't actually shoot him. It would likely start a war, but she could put one into the wall right next to his head. His beta seemed to have more common sense, held him back. Lucinda turned her own bow away from him and back to the target down the other end of the training ground, and while staring right at him, never looking away from him, let her arrow loose. She knew her aim would be true, this was a skill she had mastered years ago even without her wolf. Mastered, yes, but still trained to do every day she was able to train. Both the girls let fly down the training field as well, their moves still mimic hers as she expected them to. She watched as his eyes moved to sight her shot. Registered him realize she had not missed her mark, with a bit more than surprise. Then she simply turned away from him and walked away with the twins in tow, to collect their arrows. He left not long after that. Lucinda continued to train with the twins, the last 30 minutes being with knives and throwing practice. The girls were still learning this one and only got to use wooden training blades. They were still getting used to the feel of them, they were still having difficulty with not getting the bladed end into their desired targets. But it was new to them. James didn't want them learning to play with knives at all. Lucinda wanted her baby sisters to be able to defend themselves, whether from a distance or up close and personal. Up close and personal was the likeliest problem, so she had pushed hard on the subject, and he had finally relented just 3 months ago. She sent them home for dinner and headed home herself, food and a quick nap before border patrol. Tonight rogues would be in higher numbers and she wanted to be well rested, as she was intending on heading out earlier as the moon was rising at 2100. So she needed to be on the border and already alert by then. So a quick 2-hour nap was due before her upcoming 10 hours of patrolling ahead of her. She left the house in wolf form at 2000. Making sure to be well gone, before the goddess started playing matchmaker with the wolves. She could already hear the music being played as the mating ball was now underway, up in the ballroom on the eastern side of the pack house. Any unmated wolves from her pack were allowed to attend, all border patrols would be mated wolves with the exception of her. She would not be attending the ball, never did, and Luna Lindy held one every 3 months here. For the last 8 years, so far so good, the goddess had seen fit to leave her alone. Her mating to Matthew on her 18th birthday was because her birthday had fallen on the full moon itself. It had been one of those rare days where you could see the moon in the afternoon sky already. Cheeky goddess she was, always managed to sneak in a few ways to mate off her wolves. Though wolves found their mates only on full moon nights, hence mating balls under the full moon. There were a few lucky ones that connected outside of full moons, though Lucinda figured their beasts must be pretty special to do that. Alpha Corey mind link her just after she started patrolling. Lucinda, you don't happen to know anything about a visiting Alpha's car being damaged, do you? I know nothing, she replied, a smile in her voice unable to hide it. She was nearly laughing and desperately trying not to. And technically it wasn't her. Kyra wouldn't happen to know, would she? He was not stupid. And her amusement would be heard down the link. Kyra does as she pleases, Alpha, I can't control her sometimes. She was laughing now, couldn't help it, even Kyra was fully amused. For the love of the goddess Lucinda, get to my office now. On patrol, Alpha. Extra rogues will be coming in. Can it wait? Not like he's going anywhere right this minute now, is it? She was still laughing, couldn't help it. She knew Kyra had stuffed up the door handle, and he wasn't going to be able to get the door open anytime soon. Fine, but you and Kyra get your butts in my office directly after patrol. Do I make myself clear? Yes, Alpha, perfectly clear, she laughed. Oh, they were in so much trouble. I mean it, he snapped at her angrily, at all her amusement, and severed the link. Ah, Kyra, look, you got us into trouble again. Worth it, she snorted, and the pair of them giggled. Shame we didn't get to watch his reaction, I bet it was priceless. We got a tail, it seems. All fun gone now. What? Lucinda frowned. Kyra was in full control, being that they were in wolf form. Beta blood, that beta. Do you think they know it was us? If he wants a fight, I will leave it up to you. There were many rogues to deal with that night, and to her surprise and Kyra's, Beta stepped in and fought alongside Kyra. He was a good fighter too, though seemed a little too in your face, always trying to get between her and the rogues when he wasn't fighting one himself. Kyra had growled at him on more than one occasion to warn him to back off. Being a beta, he'd ignored her until she'd gotten so pd off she'd actually bitten him, sank her teeth right into his rib cage. His wolf had snarled at hers. They couldn't communicate due to not being from the same pack. But he seemed to get the message, or appeared to, and backed off somewhat, giving her room to do her job for the rest of the shift, thank the goddess. He'd not trailed her home, thankfully. Kyra was more than pd off with his constant company. She had not been informed by her alpha of his being there to assist her, and she did not need it, as far as she was concerned. Chapter 9. Nick POV. He'd been out stretching his legs with his beta when they'd walked around the corner of the pack house. Rip had pushed his way to the surface. Turned his whole body and attention to the pack's training grounds. There she was, all kitted out again, still couldn't see what she looked like. To his surprise, had two small protégés with her. Ah, that is why they are so close to her, he thought to himself. She's their trainer. Jeremy leaned on the wall next to him. Is it just me, or are all the she-wolves around here super tiny and freaking cute? It's just your raging hormones. Nick shot back, but when he thought about it, the Luna was tiny. As was the Gamma's mate. He knew the mutt was tiny, and this morning even Kyra's human counterpart had been tiny as well. Maybe his beta was right. You should probably stop calling her that, Jeremy said through the link, as they watched the girl turn and aim an arrow right at him, then dared him to call her a mutt again. Nick hadn't realized he'd actually said it out loud, but clearly he had. He watched as both her charges followed as she did. Very well trained, he doubted they had the power to hit him from here. But he knew she did, and he'd seen her pull that arrow back to the full power of her compound bow. It would make it. No doubt about it, and she knew it too. Jeremy had halted his natural instinct to accept the challenge. He watched as she turned her bow and aimed down the training ground at the target, never took her eyes off of him, and let her arrow fly. It hit the target at the other end, near dead center too. She was showing him just how well trained she was. Don't think you want to mess with this one, boss, Jeremy said through the link. He watched her for another minute, then walked away. He'd already scared the twins once. He didn't think he'd be able to get away with it a second time, and the she-wolf would likely turn on him. She didn't seem to care that he was an alpha. He was going to have to get that girl alone before he left, but she seemed only to appear with the two children. So it probably wasn't going to be easy. Would likely have to actually request an audience with Alpha Corey before he left tomorrow morning. He could just bet the whole Alpha unit would be there, considering they got bets on her trying to take a piece of him. It appeared that they might just be right. She had no fear of him from what he could see. But with that weapon in her hand and covered in knives, he wasn't surprised at all. She probably also knew that she was safe with the girls around her. She could wait for now. Nick was not looking forward to tonight, and the goddess better not have plans for him. He had a bigger fish to fry and didn't need the distraction of finding a mate in the middle of it. But Rip had been acting weird all day. I'd off that Kyra wolf and her human, growled at his beta at the comments about her body. Then he'd surged forward and stared at that Lucinda she-wolf as well. Both times with both women his ears had been up and he'd tried to smell them. Lucinda had never been close enough for them to catch her scent. Nick had no idea what was up with Rip. But he was prowling around inside Nick's mind, his tail flicking back and forth. He was agitated, that much was certain. Rip, what is it? He asked for the umpteenth time today. Nothing, he'd snarled back this time. Cranky today, I see. Too many she-wolves was all he said. Whatever he was trying to smell was obviously being blocked by all the unmated she-wolves, and their scent of their arousal around him. How about we get out of this pack and clear your head? Go. Rip agreed. Nick informed Jeremy he was going for a drive, to get away from all smell of the mating ball. Right, boss. I'll keep an eye on our pack. Nick did not want to be here when the moon set, and it seemed neither did Rip. He was headed towards his car, coming down the front of the pack house steps when Rip froze his body and surged forward. The wind was blowing towards them. He'd spotted Kyra leaving her house mine. Rip suddenly growled inside Nick's mind. What? Mine. Nick took a deep breath in and got as he could smell her scent, brought to him on the wind that was blowing, honey, ginger, and another breath in, lavender. Goddess, she was his mate. The moon wasn't even set yet, but they both knew it. They watched the wolf disappear into the forest heading east, to patrol probably. She didn't know it though. No wonder Rip had been off all day. He'd been trying to scent out his mate all day and even this morning, but hadn't been able to. Jeremy, get out to front of pack house now, he practically yelled the last word down the link. Jeremy appeared in record time, clearly hearing the urgency in his alpha's tone. What's wrong, Nick? I just found my mate. What, really? He was already looking around him, searching for a she-wolf in question. Where? Did she run off already? Goddess Nick, did you scare her off? He asked, but only half joking. The moon's not set yet, go protect her. It's that grey wolf from this morning, Kyra. Jeremy laughed. Now no wonder Rip growl at me. Nick pointed in the direction Kyra had headed off to Eastern Patrol, I'm guessing. All right, you not going to go? No, I'll deal with it tomorrow. You sure, boss? If she doesn't send you, you might miss your chance. It'll be fine, I know now. That is all that matters. Okay, if you say so, boss. Jeremy shook his head, but was already stripping his clothes off, copped a wolf whistle from some she-wolves who were headed this way. He turned and grinned at them, took a moment to show off all his muscles, then shifted right in front of them and headed off into the woods. Nick picked up his beta's clothing and he headed for his car, still wanted to get away from the scent around him. They couldn't do anything about their mate until after the moon set anyway, and that was over an hour away. He pulled out his phone as he walked over and checked the Luna phase, smiled to himself. Had all night and into mid-morning to sort it out, so it seemed. The moon phase wouldn't actually change till nearly 10 a.m., good. As he walked around his car, his eyes fell on the claw marks that were scratched all over the driver's door and all the way down and along it to the tailgate. The driver's side door handle was crushed as well. What the? Anger boiled inside of him. This is just what he needed. Tested the handle, the door did not open. He opened the back door and tossed Jeremy's clothes in and slammed the door shut. Snapped half a dozen photos of the damage and headed back into the Half Moon pack house in search of the Alpha. At least he didn't have to worry about a mate finding him, he had one now. He was going to demand that Alpha Corey find the culprit and make them present themselves before him. They would know fear soon. Alpha Corey was easily found, sitting at a table waiting for the moon to set. Watching over the mating ball with his Luna next to him, and his Alpha unit right there. Alpha Corey, I need a word please. His tone was full of annoyance. He had curbed his anger, didn't need the pack Alpha thinking he was spoiling for a fight. What can I do for you, son? He asked, smiling up at him. Nick was irked by the word son. The man may be his senior, but Nick was not his son. He held out his phone. That is my car. I just found it like that. Alpha Corey's smile turned to a deep frown. I'm sorry, he nodded and handed it back. Let me go look, see what I can determine. Oh, I can think of one person in this pack that might do it, that mutt of yours. Alpha Corey raised an eyebrow at Nick. Now why would you think young Lucinda would do that? Haven't even seen her yet, have you? Actually. Nick said as they headed through the pack house. I saw her this afternoon, she turned her bow on me. Again he grated the last word out. Alpha Corey sighed and shook his head. Did you disrespectfully call her a mutt again? Nick frowned, and when he didn't answer, Alpha Corey raised an eyebrow at him. They stopped outside and he looked at the car. Did you? He asked, repeating the unanswered question. Yes, but it was an accident, meant to say it internally. He shrugged. It does seem your car is damaged. No, Nick snapped, angry at his seemingly uncaring demeanor. Manners, boy. I am older than you and haven't needed to release my beast in a while. He don't like your tone, just so you know. What are you going to do about this? Nick asked, trying to rein in his anger. He didn't want an alpha-on-alpha fight and have his mate see him at odds with her alpha, not when she was one of his highest-ranked warriors. Probably wouldn't go down so well. Alpha Corey rubbed his chin thoughtfully, then sighed. Ask her, I guess. Then he turned and walked back into the pack house. Nick was hot on his heels. He stood patiently while Alpha Corey went through what appeared to be roster paperwork. She is on border patrol tonight. I'll link her to come here. Wait a minute, please. It wasn't a long conversation, but Nick could tell from the different facial expressions crossing the man's face that he was not happy, and the conversation was not going as he thought it might. When his eyes returned to Nick, he rubbed a hand over his face and shook his head. I can't pull her off patrol tonight. There will be more rogue wolves about with the mating ball in full force, but she's agreed to come directly after patrol. Did she admit to it? He practically growled. Not exactly. What does that mean? Not exactly, either she did or she didn't. This pack was infuriating to be in. Lucinda did not, but her wolf likely took offense and did the damage. I'll pay for it to be fixed, of course. Have that door removed first thing in the morning and replaced within 24 hours. The paint job could take a few days though. Is her wolf so disrespectful to all alphas? No, just you it seems. The man actually half laughed. Nick was glaring at him. Are you even going to punish her? Fix the door, I'll get the paint job sorted out at my pack. Of course I will. You can suggest appropriate punishment and I'll decide if it's fair, but remember you disrespected her first. She started this little war. That day she put an arrow 2 inches from my eye. Be thankful it wasn't in your eye. She must have been in a good mood that day. Alpha Corey chuckled. Excuse me. Nick was angry now. How does one she-wolf get away with so much? His brain was ticking now. Oh, she was probably his daughter, Nick thought. Great, an unruly alpha female. Lucinda doesn't miss Nicholas. She trained 6 hours a day, 6 days a week for years to get to where she is now. That arrow 2 inches from our eye was a warning shot, which I believe you never saw coming. Therefore, if she had wanted to kill you, you son, wouldn't be standing here, you would be dead right now. Don't you think? Nick already knew this, he just didn't like it, but knew it to be true. He very well could have died that day and it pd him off. How had he not seen them? He knew that all their scents had been masked, as had his team, but he had not seen her at all. She had seen them though, and it bothered him to no end, that yes, the she-wolf in question had beaten him that day. Put his own blade right through his own shoe, between his toes. She was good and she'd been taunting him for the fun of it likely. He had intended to take her out that day with his blade. Only to have her move out of the way and let it sail on past. He had missed his mark, and that just never happened. Not to mention at the time. Also wolf-less. Alpha Corey was smiling big now. What? Yes, Alpha Nicholas, you were beaten by a wolf-less female. And I believe she is still winning this war you have. Being you're in here all PD and she is out there laughing fully amused. Hang on, wolf-less, but if her wolf scratch up my car, he was very confused. Didn't Alpha Corey say she had been training for years to get this good? Yes son, only got her wolf a few months ago. Actually the full moon after your little encounter I do believe. How could he have been beaten by a wolf-less female? He was completely dumbstruck. His anger was completely gone, his shock at this little bit of information rendered him almost speechless. What time in the morning? He asked, was still frowning at the information. 0630, by the time she comes in. I'll be here 0615. Then he walked out of the office. She-wolf, hadn't even been a she-wolf that day. He linked Jeremy that mutt, ruined my car, scratched it up and busted the driver's door handle. Probably should stop calling her a mutt, then boss, he chuckled back. How is my mate? Fine, I'll let you know if we need help, I'll join patrol and fight alongside her boss. When you going to come and claim her? In the morning, if she's on patrol, probably needs to be there, and from what I saw yesterday, I doubt she'd be impressed by us trying to claim her mid-rogue attacks. Alright, he sounded dubious. Nick returned to his room and sank down on his bed. Rip was prowling around in his mind, though seemed fine with not dashing off to claim his mate. On the bright side, she was a high-ranked warrior, and that would mean a strong heir she'd produce. At least she wasn't some prissy princess who would just laze about all the time. Was likely going to want to be out patrolling, and that was fine with him. As long as she produced an heir, he didn't care what she did afterwards. Chapter 10. Nick POV, she bit you? Nick asked, shocked, when his beta report he'd been bitten by Kyra. Yes, I was just doing my job, trying to protect her and get between her and the rogues. Doesn't like it. Back off a bit, she's the warrior that backs up all the patrols. I believe in her. Wolf can handle herself. I've seen it myself. How much off? This is the future Luna we're talking about here? You are going to claim her, right boss? Nick's mouth twitched into a smile. Yes Jeremy, he recalled what his mate looked like. Tiny pretty thing, goddess, she'd barely come up to his chest, he was going to tower over her. Well, on the bright side, he can just pick her up and toss her over his shoulder and make her go with him. He chuckled to himself. She was too little to cause him much trouble. And you didn't want a mate? Rip snorted at him, interrupting his thoughts. I never said that, just wasn't actively looking for one. He wondered what her name was. The patrol he'd been with last night had only called her by her wolf's name. He'd have to get Alpha Corey to bring her to him in the morning. Explain he'd scented her, but also knew she'd be on patrol, so left it till shift was over. The alpha in him would respect that, putting the pack's safety first, when there were so many rogues roaming around. He lay in his bed and wondered what she would make of him. His pack was one of the largest around, and his reputation did precede him, and well should. Alpha duel you older brother and kill him to take over at 25, gives you a reputation. It also helped that those loyal to his now dead half-brother Liam, who had fled from being slayed, had spread the word of his duel and Rip's display of power. Nick rolled over in the bed and slept till the sun was up. It was nice to wake up refreshed. He showered, shaved, and fixed his hair, got ready to officially meet his mate. He smiled. She had looked right at him yesterday, rolled her eyes at him and the way he had been looking at her. Probably used to people staring at her wolf, then being shocked by her appearance. She and her wolf were complete opposites. He was waiting outside the Alpha's office promptly at 0615. Alpha Corey looked him up and down, raised an eyebrow. Who you trying to impress, son? I found my mate last night, I'll need an introduction this morning. I don't know who she is. That grabbed Alpha Corey's attention. You just left her out there. My beta spent the night watching her, she's fine. You're an oddball, you know that, right? What alpha doesn't go and claim what's his, right away, he said going into his office. Shaking his head. Nick followed him into the office. She was on patrol, figured you'd rather she stay on patrol with all the rogues out there, than be in my bed. Alpha Corey was almost laughing at him. Fair enough, you got a description. Go one better, got her wolf's name, Kyra I believe. He smiled, he could only imagine this alpha wouldn't be too happy to lose one like her. He wouldn't if she was one of his warriors. Oh really, has that wolf sent you out? Alpha Corey was actually chuckling now, very amused. It seemed she's a stubborn one, that one. It'll be fine, I'm sure, and as long as you bring her here, before 10 a.m., we'll be all good by the goddess. I hope you're right, son. He sat behind his desk and smiled to himself. Let's deal with Lucinda first, shall we? Yes, let's. Nick's tone changed instantly, he was going to enjoy having a piece of that girl. Though he was still reeling, from the knowledge she had been wolfless, up until a few months ago. He watched Alpha Corey's eyes glaze over for a minute. Then he turned to Nick. Did you think up a good punishment? Amusement still clear in his voice. Not really, had other things on my mind. His mouth twitched. Alpha Corey's Beta, Gamma, and Delta all burst into the room grinning stupidly, pushing and shoving each other out the way. Boss, please tell us the bet is still on. Beta Adam asked excitedly. Oh, it's on, and I'm upping the pot today. Alpha Corey laughed. $500, she takes one look at him and tells him off right away. Nick frowned at them all. Again they were wagering on the outcome of this Lucinda chick. He didn't understand them at all. The woman had ruined his car and needed to not only explain herself, but also apologize to him. There was a knock on the door and the Alpha called out for them to come in. To his surprise, his mate walked into the room, his mouth twitched on one side. Well, let's deal with her first then. She had taken 3 steps into the room before coming to a halt. He watched her glance around the room. She was frowning, and when her eyes met his, a beautiful golden brown, he smiled right at her, his 1000 WATT smile, that he'd literally seen, could make she-wolves go weak at the knees from. Saw her nostrils flare as his scent filled her, and to his surprise, she did not smile back at him at all, actually glared right at him, angry it seemed. Alpha Corey interrupted their meeting. Lucinda, you're here. Nick's eyes widened at her name. No way, it couldn't be, he thought. His eyes moved to Alpha Corey. The minute he'd said her wolf's name he'd known, his eyes moved back to his mate. No, she yelled into the room and then just turned and stalked from the room and slammed the door shut. Alpha Corey and his whole Alpha unit burst out laughing. His Gamma was staggering around holding his abdomen. He must have informed them. That was why they had all come bursting through the door, waiting on the bet and upping the ante. Nick was staring at them, a little more than dumbfounded. What just happened? He turned his eyes on the men in the room. Alpha Corey stopped laughing. Sorry son, you might have your work cut out for you, where Lucinda is concerned, and going around calling her a mutt didn't help your cause. Rip was more than PD off. Though Nick couldn't tell who it. They clearly only had themselves to blame. Had she just rejected them? He didn't think so, no pain coursing through him. He had seen more than a few rejections in his life, his father do it, both his brothers had done it. Caused actual physical pain to both parties involved. No, she was just shocked, as much as he was. They were going to have to try this again. He frowned. I guess I do. He nodded. Might need a few more days in your pack, Alpha Corey. Granted, that is just more fun for us, he chuckled. Is everything a joke, or a betting opportunity around here? You just got to learn to lighten up, is all son. If you don't mind, we'd love to bet on how long it takes you to get her to come around. Beta Adam laughed. I do mind, actually. About your car, Nicholas, how would you like me to punish your mate, the future Luna of your pack? Nick was rubbing his temples now. Crap, his mate had done that. I guess we're not at this point. I still expect your pack to pay for the damages though. It happened under your watch. Sure, I'll take it out of her pay. Nick glared at him. This just turned into a nightmare. What? I was going to make her pay for it anyway. Alpha Corey smiled at him. He had absolutely no idea what to do right this minute. Jeremy was going to have a field day with this one. On the bright side, he knew where she lived and that helped. I think she might need a minute, son. Alpha Corey piped up again. Me too, he muttered. You going to reject her? Corey's tone was suddenly dead serious. All amusement was gone from it. The whole atmosphere in the room was suddenly very serious. All eyes were on him. The joking was gone from each and every one of them. No. I will claim what is mine. You and I might need to sit down for a proper discussion about this. Agreed. James nodded. I'll go tell Gabby. Nick watched as Corey dismissed the Gamma. Whose child is she? None of ours. Alpha Corey replied. Her family. Dead. What? All of them, he frowned. Bar her twin sisters, yes. It was a lot to absorb. I have to go and talk to my men, he said, and left the room. He really did need a moment to come to terms with the news. Chapter 11. Lucinda POV showered after patrol and changed into jeans and a t-shirt. Lucinda headed for the Alpha's office. She was expecting a full reprimand and punishment. Alpha Nicholas was probably also going to be in the office as well, and she could full well imagine, he was going to be wanting a piece of her and Kyra. Demanding it, she imagined. Kyra was already curled up in the back of her mind, feigning sleep, but Lucinda could feel she was faking it, amused still over her antics from yesterday which had landed them in hot water. This was her mess. She had been the one to mark up the car, all of her own accord. Lucinda fully expected her to take the punishment and apologize. Lucinda wasn't going to. Technically she had done no wrong here. She and Kyra giggled together. They really wished they had seen his reaction to the damage. Could only imagine he'd gone all alpha wolf into a crazed rage. He. Kyra, you have no fear, girl, Lucinda chuckled. It was why they were always getting into trouble. Heck, Lucinda had never gotten into any trouble at all while here, until Kyra had appeared. Now they found themselves in the Alpha's office, 1 or twice a month. Stepping up to the Alpha's door, she reined in her smile and amusement. Knocked on the door and waited. Opened it and walked in when she heard Alpha Corey call out for her to do so, though even those 2 words to her ears sounded as though he was amused by something. He was generally a happy man. She did like him. Lucinda had only taken 3 steps into the room, when she stopped and Kyra stood in her mind, all attention. A scent filled her, mint mixed with aniseed and pine needles. Her eyes moved about the room. Delta, Gamma, Beta, Alpha, all she knew. Her eyes moved further around the room, and there was that big BD, standing on the other side of the room. He was dressed to the nines, in a formal black suit, black shirt, black tie with blue stripes on it. His black hair was gelled and swooped back off to the right. His dark blue eyes were locked on hers. There was a smile in them. Lucinda and Kyra watched as his mouth moved to form a smile. Sweet goddess, he was handsome when he smiled like that. It was the first time they had actually seen him smile, really smile. The man actually looked happy to see her. Made Kyra huffed inside her mind, seemingly more annoyed than happy, about the goddess's so-called mate for them. Lucinda didn't much like it either. This big BD had been calling her and Kyra a mutt, the whole time he'd been here. Labeled her that from the first time he'd laid eyes on them, months ago, and why? Because they had bested him. Watching his reaction to her alpha say her name, the smile on his face had disappeared instantly. He had turned and looked at her alpha, then back to her, disbelief on his face. No, she had yelled, agreeing with his look at her. She could see he was unhappy about the pairing, well she was too, and let him know it. Then she had simply turned and stormed out of the room and slammed the door behind her. Made her way back to her house. How could this be? He didn't like her and she didn't like him. Goddess surely got it wrong. Kyra, she asked her wolf for an opinion. He called us a mutt, she snarled, seemingly in agreement with Lucinda. We're a Luna, we deserve respect. Lucinda sighed, crawled into her bed and stayed there. She was not expecting him to come hunting her down right this minute. Probably need a minute to think out the words of a rejection. She and Kyra were tired anyway, had a long night. But her mind couldn't really shut off. He knew the way he was dressed up, the way he had looked right at her, he had known before she had walked into that office. Happy about it, the smile he'd shot at her said it all. He was mated to Kyra, an impressive wolf. No alpha wouldn't like her wolf, strong and fearless. It had always been a concern in the back of her mind, that Kyra would attract an alpha. Lucinda had always hoped not. Alphas could be horrid, she had seen that firsthand herself. And this one, already had a reputation. His smile had been wiped off of his face, the minute Alpha Corey had said her name, which implied he knew the name of the girl under all that black kit of hers. Just had no idea of what she looked like. Well, she guessed it was as good as over now, there was no way he would choose her to be his Luna. We'll just wait it out, he'd leave soon. Kyra huffed, she herself was feeling unhappy at this moment, her own mate thought she was a mutt. It was not sitting well with her. The rejection would come soon enough, it was just a matter of time. Sleep took a long time to claim them, and when it did it was restless and fitful at best. Lucinda flung herself out of her very messy bed, from all the tossing and turning she had done, glanced at the clock, only 2 p.m. She needed to get away, shifted and stalked towards the eastern border, didn't even stop to acknowledge the patrol staring at her. He did ask what was going on, they ignored him. The minute she hit rogue territory they sprinted with all of Kyra's strength and speed off into no man's land to get away to think about the events of this morning. Alpha Corey was going to be mad at her again, but this time he had to understand, right? A new mate, and one that already disliked her. Got a tail? Kyra let her know. They had run non-stop all the way into White Lotus Pack territory and were now just walking about aimlessly. She made her way to where the old pack house was and pawed at the ground a few times, then moved off again. Made their way to where Lucinda's old house had been, the place she'd grown up in, a happy home with two lovingly mated parents, and Kyra just flopped down on the ground and lay there. Our tail is the beta. Kyra's eyes landed on his wolf, big and light brown with light caramel paws and underbelly, a couple of white markings on his face. They recognized him from last night's patrolling. Ah, that was why he was suddenly there and constantly getting in her face. She was his alpha's mate and his alpha had sent him to watch over her. They were well away from her pack now. Surprisingly, her so-called mate wasn't out here hunting her down to retrieve her. Or maybe he didn't care that she had run off. Or had he not yet decided what to do about her at this point, considering his reaction to her and she to him? But then what was his beta doing tailing her everywhere? Who knew what went through that big BS brain, if he even had one? His wolf just seemed to sit and watch hers, probably worried she would bite him again. She chuckled, we bit his beta, wondered what he made of that, seeing as he must have known what she was by then. A Luna biting the pack beta, not even she knew the consequences of that one. His wolf had trailed her at a safe distance and just watched curiously at her behavior. As she nosed around and tried desperately once more to pick up anything of her old pack. Even though she knew it was a fruitless task, couldn't help herself, it was her home and she was desperate for any scent of home. Especially right this minute. Movement on the far east side of the abandoned pack caught her attention. There was a wolf strolling this way, large and black. Kyra stood all ears up, tail low, nose in the air trying to pick up who or what rank it was. It did not look like a rogue at all, clean and pristine. The beta's wolf was instantly next to hers, his wolf pushing at her, trying to make her move and leave. Their movement caught the other's wolf's attention, its head slightly, appeared surprised to see other wolves here, then it stood straight to its full height and snarled loud and aggressive. Alpha power pouring out of it. A warning to them and a display of his power, to show he was not to be messed with, she guessed. But this was her pack, not his. Kyra snarled right back at him. Was suddenly nipped by the beta's wolf, and shoved by him quite firmly, enough to make her take a few steps. They understood his meaning, it was time to go. She turned a little reluctantly and ran off towards the west, the beta wolf hot on her heels. She heard the mighty alpha howl a minute later and just knew he was coming for them. She pushed herself harder, the beta managed to just keep up with her. She could hear the alpha chasing, though she didn't think he was out for blood, more like chasing her off the pack's territory. Her pack territory at that. It stopped chasing her at the border to White Lotus pack. Kyra turned and looked at him. She was a good 200 meters into no man's land. He had stopped and was just watching her, as she watched him now. She watched as he shifted into his human form. He'd obviously gotten what he wanted, her them off the pack's turf. She was getting a real good look at him now. It had been a long time since Lucinda had laid eyes on this man, but she recognized him. The alpha, that had turned her life upside down and taken everything from her, that was him. The very alpha, who had taken her mate Matthew from them. Kyra could feel Lucinda's anger and rage at seeing this man. Recalling all the pain and suffering he had caused to her pack's women and children. Just to claim what wasn't even rightfully his. Fury built up in them both. The growl that erupted from Kyra was so loud and aggressive, her meaning was not misunderstood by him at all. The deliberate step she took towards him noted as well. Careful Kyra, he is an alpha wolf. Lucinda suddenly worried they weren't going to be able to take him on. I know that she shot back, not caring for Lucinda's concerns at all. Clearly felt she could take him on. Let's take him close to the pack, where backup can be gotten if you insist on fighting him. Let's, she agreed. She was spoiling for a fight, it seemed, Lucinda's emotions having an effect on her wolves. The man was standing watching her wolf, his interest in her sudden behavior had been piqued. Not many wolves would dare challenge an alpha wolf, and she wouldn't smell of any rank to him, just a warrior, she imagined. Kyra snarled at him again and took a step back, her tail flicking back and forth, her ears were flat back on her head. She was all aggression and he knew it. He would not know her. The last time he had laid eyes on her, she had been wolfless. Kyra's challenge to him was clear for all to see. Come and get me. She turned and ran off towards their pack. She knew the beta was with her, hot on her heels. She heard the alpha wolf howl and knew he was accepting her challenge. He would be fast and strong, but he was old and she was young, her speed unmatched by anyone. Even the beta was now falling behind now that Kyra was full of adrenaline and pushing herself to her full potential. It was a long way to the pack and she wanted him closer, only needed to be within linking range really. But the closer the better. Kyra burst out of the wooded area on rogue territory about 200 meters from Half Moon Pack's eastern border and skidded to a stop. The beta shot past her. He hadn't realized she was going to stop. Her eyes fell on the wolf of Alpha Darwin. It had come to a halt just on the edge of the forest, realizing she now had backup. He would be able to see the patrolling wolves pulling into formation behind her, to protect their border from an invading force. She had taunted him all the way to her home, and she had warriors behind her, not that they would interfere in the challenge she was about to issue. It was time to kill this BD once and for all. Kyra let out a howl so loud it hurt Lucinda's own ears. It was her Luna howl, and then was growling at him so fiercely, that she knew he could not mistake her challenge for anything else. The wolf launched itself at her and she at it. Her wolf was suddenly slammed onto the ground, by one from behind her, and when Kyra got up there was a massive black wolf standing in front of her. She knew it was Alpha Nicholas's wolf blocking her, could smell him. It was not facing her, was standing staring down the other alpha wolf, growling and snarling as aggressive as she had been a moment ago. Another wolf landed right next to his. She recognized Alpha Kori's wolf Sage, and the two of them were blocking her from getting to her intended target. Kyra was not having it that BD was ours. She shot off the mark to her left to go round the alphas blocking her path to him, completely PD off, that his wolf had taken her down and stopped her from getting what she wanted. Found both betas, Adam's wolf DOM and his betas wolf barring her way, she snapped aggressively at them and turned to bolt the other way, off to her right to try and go get him, only to find the rest of the alpha unit blocking her way. She snarled at them and launched herself at them, but both wolves pushed her back. Enough was roared down from Alpha Kori through the mind link. Kyra snarled back at him, trying to shake off the order, and tried again to take off towards Alpha Darwin's wolf, who was standing watching her wolf's actions trying to get to him. Kyra was crazed with her need to kill him. Running back and forth now, trying to push past the line of wolves, surrounding her and keeping her behind them, they were being as aggressive as she was in their attempt to contain her. All thoughts were gone now, just the need to kill Alpha Darwin. She was growling and snarling so aggressively, that her intent would be clear to everyone here watching her. She could not clear the line, no matter how she tried. It didn't help that Thomas and her retrieval team had arrived as well and were all backing up the Alpha's unit. To many trying to stop her, she was never clearing them to get to him. She was being surrounded by them all, closing the distance around her so not even Kyra could go back and forth. She was being forced back onto pack territory, my office now. Alpha Kori shot down the mink link, a direct order she could not ignore. That's him, she yelled back angrily. I don't care. Go now, he roared the order at her. Kyra turned and left, unable to ignore the force he had used on her. She was marched back to the pack house by the Alpha unit and her own retrieval team. Completely surrounded all the way there like a prisoner, would be. She shifted the minute she arrived. Luna, Lindy and Gabby were both standing looking at her with worried expression. She took the offered dress and slipped it over her head. The minute the dress was on, there was a very large hand clamped around her elbow and she was dragged away into the pack house. Alpha Nicholas, she could tell without even looking, just by his scent. She could feel waves of anger coming off of him. She practically had to run to keep up with his long strides. He was giving her no option, but to fall in line right this minute. She was pulled into the Alpha's office and Kori was right there with him, banged the office door shut with so much force it actually rattled the hinges. Chapter 12. Lucinda POV. They both looked completely furious with her, though Alpha Kori nowhere near as much as Alpha Nicholas, her newly acquired mate, looked as though he was about ready to murder her. Well, he could try it. Kyra was certain she could have taken that other Alpha BD down for good. Then the twins would have been safe for the rest of their lives here within Half Moon Pack. This was the only time she had ever laid eyes upon him. Who knew when it would happen again, when another chance like that would come along. When he had been alone, no pack members with him, to help him win a fight. Lucinda yanked her arm free of Alpha Nicholas's grip, twisted and pulled with all her force, in a hard jerk that had his thumb gave way, and she was out of his grip. She didn't care that he was angry with her. She walked away from him and sat herself down in a chair in front of Alpha Corey. She only needed to explain herself to her Alpha. That big BD had yet to claim her, or she him, so she didn't owe him anything. What is wrong with you? How many times have I warned you about exactly this? Alpha Corey was yelling at her now, the full force of his alpha anger falling on her. Not something she had ever incurred before, she now realized. That was him, she yelled back. Yeah, I heard you the first time, he snarled back at her. You think Kyra is a match for an alpha wolf, do you? Every word laced with anger and disbelief over their actions. Yes. Kyra surged forward and snarled right back at him. What am I going to do with you? He snapped at her blatant disrespect. You Kyra, he addressed her, wolf, are out of control. He was glaring at her, wolf, and she right back. Lucinda, you need to control her and remind her she is not all powerful. Kyra snarled at him. She hated people telling her what she was and wasn't capable of doing. Forced Lucinda's body up and out of the chair they were sitting in, to stare him down. Alpha Corey shot to his feet instantly, his alpha aura flowed out of him and hit her full force enough. His voice was deathly quiet. Kyra let go Lucinda's side to her, wolf. She'd never seen him this mad at them before, and that aura was starting to hurt her, and Kyra alike. The more she fought against it, the more it hurt. Please, Lucinda begged her. Kyra huffed and receded. I could have taken him, she muttered, and allowed Lucinda to control their body again. Lucinda sat back down in the chair, in front of Alpha Corey. He dropped his aura after 10 seconds or so. Do you think bringing that wolf here was a good idea? What were you trying to do? His voice was a bit calmer now, but that edge of fury was still there. I'm not talking to you about this. With him here, she jerked her thumb in the direction of Alpha Nicholas without looking at him. The chair she was sitting in was abruptly spun around and she found herself face to face with him, his face mere inches off of hers. Oh, you will talk. I want an explanation myself, he grated out at her. His words were all laced with anger. Why do you even care? I'm just a mutt to you, she shot at him, her anger turning on him. That may be. But you are my mate and you will answer to me, he practically snarled at her. No, I will not, she snarled right back in his face, not caring this minute who he was or what he was supposed to be to her. She saw, just about every vein in his neck, bulge like they were going to pop, his eyes darkened as well, turning almost black. His wolf was PD too, she guessed. I will not tolerate disrespect, little girl, it was growled at her. But you give it so readily. If you can dish it out, you should be able to take it, she and Kyra growled right back at him. Everybody just calm down. It was Alpha Corey, trying to defuse the situation at hand. He knew well, Kyra was winding up for a fight, mate or not. She would shift and go him, if she wanted to. Her eyes were locked onto his. If he wanted a staring competition, he would get one, she thought. If he wants a fight, we'll give him one. Lucinda thought, her blood was still boiling and she was itching to punch something. Wondered what he would do if she cracked him one, or two for that matter. He was straddling her legs, and a good swift kick would surprise him, which would allow her to get at least one punch into that face of his. He suddenly arched an eyebrow at her as if he knew what she was thinking. Do you really want to find out, Lucinda? You might not like the answer. His voice held a challenging tone that made her think twice. If he knew it was coming, would likely deflect it easily. Answer Alpha Corey's questions or I will be the one asking the questions. She snapped her mouth shut, firmly pressing her lips together. He didn't know anything about her, and she was not about to elaborate either. Again that raised eyebrow at her. He clearly wasn't liking being ignored. Probably used to everyone just doing as he told them. Well, she held Luna rank from her old pack, and technically if he didn't reject her Luna rank of his pack, a glint of angry amusement touched her lips. She was his equal and bossing her around wouldn't be as easy as he thought it might be. Perhaps he should know more about people before he went throwing his authority around. Alpha Corey sighed heavily from his chair. Perhaps Alpha Nicholas, you could give myself and young Lucinda here a minute alone, to sort this out. She watched Alpha Nicholas's eyes move to Alpha Corey. Why should I? I think I am entitled to an explanation. Agreed, but there are some things you don't yet understand and with time I'm certain Lucinda here will tell you, but please may I have a moment alone with her? Fat chance, she muttered. Alpha Nicholas's eyes moved back to hers. He hadn't liked her comment, she could tell. His jaw was ticking like crazy. He stood up to his full height, making her face turn all the way up to look at him. He was freaking crazy tall, she realized. If you think we are done, you are mistaken, Lucinda, he spoke to her. I don't actually answer to you, she shot back at him. Again that arched eyebrow. Oh. I think you'll find that you do, in fact answer to me. I am your mate, and with that he turned and walked out of the office. I am your mate, she repeated, sarcasm dripping off every word. Lucinda, don't challenge him. Alpha Corey sighed. Now please explain to me, why after all the warnings I've given you, you went and did exactly what I feared the most. He was alone, no pack, no alpha unit, alone. It's the best time to kill him, she said honestly. So you brought him here? He shook his head. Well, in case we couldn't handle him, and did need backup. Now, what do you think is going to happen? I don't know. I didn't think you would stop me, to be honest. And what happens when you're not here anymore? He asked her, staring directly at her. Why wouldn't I be here? She was confused now. Are you forgetting your mate out there, Alpha Nicholas? He gestured to the office door. He'll leave. He doesn't even like us, she muttered. We're just a mutt to him. No Alpha wants a mutt for a mate. You two will work this out. Alphas always claim what belongs to them. I don't belong to him, she shook her head. I belong to Matthew, and suddenly there were tears welling in her eyes. Lucinda, his voice was soft now. I know, you must be very confused right now, but please don't do anything, else that's stupid, he sighed. Can I go now? She whispered. Her anger was gone and she just felt sad, for all that she had lost. Promise me, you're not going to run off. Where would I go? My home was destroyed. Tears fell down her face. And my sisters are here. I know, and seeing that Alpha has brought it all back to you, I understand. No, he didn't. He hadn't had to live through it. Feel every bond she'd had snap and severe, to grieve not just his family, but his mate and his pack too. It wasn't something May could understand. Her tears were freely flowing and she couldn't stop them now. I want to go now, she whispered. Her pain was becoming too much to bear in front of him, in front of anyone for that matter. Go home, he nodded. Nowhere else, I mean it. She stood and left. Tears were still spilling down her face. She stepped out of her Alpha's office, saw him coming right towards her. Was small and quick enough to duck under and away from the hands that were trying to grab onto her. She was not going to deal with him, she owed him nothing. The second she dodged him, she ran out of the pack house and all the way to her house, slammed the door shut and locked it. Ran to her room and threw herself onto her bed. It didn't take long for the sobs to rack her body, to feel the emotional exhaustion of her day fall upon her and eventually take over her. Sleep finally claimed her emotionally and physically exhausted body. 13. Nick POV Jeremy was in hysterics, literally rolling around in his bed laughing so hard, that tears were coming out of his eyes. He thought it was absolutely hilarious that Nick's mate had turned out to be the knife-wielding, bow-toting she-wolf, who had showed him up and was more than happy to PS him off at every turn. Laughed even harder when he'd found out it was his mate, who had taken claws to the Alpha's own vehicle. The tears had rolled out of him when he'd heard she'd yelled no and stormed out of the Alpha's office and away from him. Especially when he could see how Nick was dressed, to impress. Which clearly it had not. Finally found a she-wolf who could resist his goddess-given good looks. When you're done laughing at my expense. Nick huffed at him. He'd known this was going to be the reaction, and goddess help him, when Jeremy related to the rest of his unit, and Nick knew the man well enough to know he was going to, the first chance he got. Even if Nick Alpha ordered the man not to say a word, he would find some loophole to get out of it and inform them. He was a devious BD with a streak for pure mischief. Might take more than a minute, he laughed up at his Alpha. Nick walked over to his beta and put a boot into him, shoved him clean off the other side of the bed and heard him land on the floor, with a satisfied thud. His laughing finally stopped, but he was still smiling up at him. I want you to watch her. Why, I'm tired, boss, barely had any sleep a few hours. Just walk over there, you know where she lives. Knock on her door, introduce yourself properly, and for once in your life, suck it up, apologize for the insults you called her, your mate. Problem likely solved. Somehow I don't think it is going to be that easy. His mind recalled the way Alpha Corey and his unit had laughed, just like Jeremy had done actually. He watched Jeremy nod and then chuckle. You're probably right, you've probably PD'd off the moon goddess herself. By refusing all these years, to attend or hold her mating balls for your pack members, now she's seen fit to punish you. With a mate who's just as stubborn, defiant, and only does what they want, remind you of anyone in particular? He snorted at Nick, when Nick turned angry eyes on him. Nick knew what he meant, a mate with the same temperament as him. Difficult to say the least. She'll come around, he knew she would. She was female and he drop dead gorgeous, no woman cold hold out on him for long. And if she doesn't? Jeremy said, finding clothes to put on. There is such a thing, you know. Rejection. Nick stared at his friend now, wide-eyed. Really, you think she would reject me? I don't know, Nick. I know nothing about her, neither do you for that matter. Will you trail her for the day, currently in her house sleeping I believe? Just set yourself up by the house, doze if you like, but make sure Cal is on alert for her movements. I have to go and sort out my pack members, find out who made it off to other packs and who and how many will be joining ours. Get them organized and send them back to the pack ahead of us. It'll be just you and I here after that, to deal with Lucinda. Yeah, can't you see I'm getting dressed here? He raised an eyebrow at Nick and his tone implied, are you blind? Nick frowned at him, but just shook his head. Thanks, link me if she does anything. He shrugged. You know, you worried she's got a boyfriend somewhere here, boss? What? No. Well, now I do. Nick had not even considered that. She might well have, high-ranked warrior with a tiny human, curves in all the right places and a wolf that pretty. It was more than likely. If she did, he would have to go. Right away, no one was touching his mate. Jeremy started laughing all over again, as he watched it dawn on Nick that his mate, might be some other wolf out there. I'll watch her, go do your alpha duties. Thanks, anything out of the ordinary? Sure thing boss, but what's out of the ordinary for us, might not be for her. Nick glared at his beta and left the room. It was nearing lunchtime and he should have squared away his pack members by now, but had been preoccupied pacing around in his suite most of the morning. He found his pack members, kicked a few of the lazy BDS out of their beds, shocking their new mates, and had them all report to the front of the pack house for inspection. He could see her house from here and Jeremy casually leaning against a tree, just off behind it. 13 members of his pack had mates now, they were all loved up and looking happy it seemed. He lost 6 females to other packs, 2 to Half Moon Pack itself, 1 warrior and 1 school teacher. 7 of the 10 males had found mates here at the ball, that was good. Mated wolves were generally happy wolves. He noted the other alphas all waiting around on him, to sort out some of his going to them. They didn't seem all that annoyed. One of them, Alpha Frederick, who he knew, smiled right at him, a knowing smile, and as he'd headed off, had nodded his head and hollered, "Good luck, Nicholas." It was clear the man knew of him finding his mate and that he was having a difficult time with it, at that. Who had spilled the beans he didn't know, had to be Alpha Corey or his unit, no one else really knew. Jeremy may laugh at him and be itching to tell Kevin and Brady, but he wouldn't be so disrespectful as to blab to other packs. "Boss, she's leaving pack territory, eastern border." Wolfed right out of her house and headed off clear in her direction. "What, Cal will stay with her? You'd better get out here and catch her." "Yes." Nick agreed, he was mad now. What was she thinking? Was she just going to run away and not deal with their mate bond? Neither one of them would be able to move on if she just left, and neither of them broke the bond. Was she so dumb? Did she not know how a bond worked? Maybe being wolf-less for most of her life, she didn't. Has she got no education at all? He was stalking his way past the pack house headed for the eastern border when Alpha Corey's Delta Pete called out to him, "Alpha Nicholas, Alpha Corey needs a word." "It will have to wait, my mate just bolted." "No she didn't, please come and speak with Alpha Corey." Nick stopped walking and looked at the Delta. "She didn't. It's very unlikely." "Please, Alpha Corey will explain." Nick sighed, her Alpha would have been alerted to her leaving pack territory in all likelihood. He would know her better, and if they thought it was unlikely, then it probably was, he would have to take the chance. They did know her better. He tried to link to Jeremy but got nothing, already too far away. That didn't bode well, meant he was running full tilt as was his mate. Right into rogue territory at that. Did not make him happy in the least. He walked into Alpha Corey's office. "We need to make this quick, I have to go and hunt my mate down, it seems." "No need for that, she'll come back." "And you're certain because her twin sisters are here?" "She's probably a little on the emotional side right now. Besides, I heard your beta Jeremy went right after her." Nick nodded. He did. "Where is she going?" He was curious. There was literally nothing out there. Alpha Corey sat there in his chair, seemingly debating what to tell him, what information was either relevant or what would placate him. "There's an abandoned pack out east. She goes there sometimes to clear her head and think things through." Across rogue territory. Nick could only think of one abandoned pack out this way. He didn't like it at all. Horrid history. Why would anyone go there, to think, of all places? And you just let her, a lone unmated she-wolf, roam out there at will like that? "I heard you helped out the other night, on border patrol, you would have seen her wolf fight." "I'm not concerned particularly, and you know what Lucinda is like." He smiled pointedly at Nick. "Do you think they can't handle themselves? Because I assure you, she can, they can. That is not the point. My mate just left pack territory and ran off into rogue territory. She has a history, something you should discuss with her. She'll be safe and your beta is tracking her. I'm sure he's a capable man, yes. Yes, very. Nick acknowledged, then try to relax, just give her some space. I'm not exactly known for my patience. Nick reminded him. Alpha Corey chuckled, neither is she. You two will annoy out of each other. Be fun to watch. She'll submit, he shrugged. Can I put bets on that? He laughed. Nick frowned at him, this man was infuriating. Tell me about her. How old is she? 26. You said she just got her wolf a few months ago. She did. Aggressively exploded out of young Lucinda, let out a mighty howl, snarled at all of us like we were the enemy actually. Angry wolf right from get-go. You don't want to PS her off. And a real short fuse to match. Nick was frowning now even deeper, aggressively exploded. Yes son, took less than 2 minutes, first shift was akin to an alpha shifting for the first time. Who are her parents, where are they? Parents killed, I believe. You believe? She's part of your pack, how can you not know the answer to that question? Didn't see it? Nobody here did, he shrugged. Nick didn't like that answer. His pack was much larger, but he still knew all his pack members' history, every pack member had a file with all their details in it. How else were you supposed to keep track of family lineage, who was mated to who, pups born, lost family members to rogue attacks? Everything was in those files, and they were updated regularly. Even those 4 young girls he had rescued, the day he'd come across Lucinda, had files, and the trauma they had suffered was documented, their medical files from his pack doctor included, due the trauma of the situation. Trauma was not to be taken lightly, could cause all sorts of issues. Turn a she-wolf rogue if it was too much for them to handle, turn them mute or even make them completely isolate themselves from other pack members. Male wolves could become so aggressive they turn on other pack members, for seemingly no reason, and could go rogue as well. You got a file on my mate, I could read, he asked, hoping the man at least kept records. Yes, but not my place to give it to you. What? I'm her mate and an alpha. You will give it to me, he demanded. To his amazement, Alpha Corey shook his head. Yes, you are an alpha. As for her mate? You haven't claimed her and she has not accepted you, so that doesn't count right now. Nick glared at him, this man was insane. I am her mate, and I want that file. You may have been gifted to her by the goddess sun, but I didn't see either of you accept each other, or have I missed something today? Nick was starting to lose it. I already told you I would be claiming her. You did, he nodded, but you haven't, so without Lucinda's permission I won't give you her file. I already told you, she has a history, and if she wants to tell you, she will. It's actually not for me to say. Even Rip was getting PD off now, this man wasn't going to talk, he'd only met the man 2 days ago and he in all appearances looked like the most laid back and relaxed alpha he had ever met. Yet here he was stubborn like an alpha, all right, his appearance was deceptive, that was for sure. Nick had thought him to be a bit of a joke, a betting, gambling man, who just made fun of everything. He felt Rip surface. He wanted to know about his mate too and was getting to the point of expressing his dislike and rage. Alpha Corey's hands lifted. Now, calm down son. I swore to her, I wouldn't tell anyone. Now if I go telling you son, what good is my word? Nick's jaw tightened and was ticking. Why would you swear something like that? Because I needed to, no one in this pack will readily give you her history, and I mean no one. Or I will punish them myself. That gained Nick's undivided attention. Is it that bad? He changed tactics. Alpha Corey was no fool, stared right at him for a full minute. You'd have to be the judge of that, when she tells you, and that son will take trust. She told you. His anger was abating. If she had trauma he would have to give some leeway. She had no choice at the time. That is all I will say on the subject. But try and relax. She will come back like I said, her twin sisters are here, she will never abandon them. There is room in my car for both of them as well. I'll just take them too. He shrugged. What was two more females to his pack? No, actually you won't be. The twins will be staying here. Nick frowned. It took less than 10 seconds for it to dawn on him. The Gamma's twin girls, that's who you're talking about. Yes, and neither Gabby nor James are just going to hand over the girls to you. Not after your display the other night, not that that would matter. Why are they with your Gamma and not Lucinda herself? Again, you might want to talk to her on that one. Nick was not getting anywhere with this man. Whatever her story was, he was not going to part with it. Her history can't be all that good. If no one was allowed to talk about it, do you think she will go willingly with me? I don't know, to be honest. He shrugged. You handle her the wrong way, you might find yourself facing a formal rejection. Nick nor Rip were impressed at all now. She's that stubborn. Not usually, but can be at times. I'll just mark her then. Nick shrugged and waved a hand dismissively. Once his mark was on her, she'd have no choice, and the mate bond would grow and she would submit to him in a matter of days. If she still didn't want to be his mate once she produced him an heir, he would just reject her and set her free. Rip growled at him at this thought. Nick ignored him. He found Alpha Corey glaring at him now. You will not forcibly mark or mate her. I guarantee you she will kill you if you do. Marked or mated, it will make no difference to her and her wolf. If you do take her from here and she calls me and tells me you have forced her, I will come and collect her myself. There was anger in every word he spoke. That would start a war. Only if you are still alive when I get there. And I will not come alone. Nick realized that Alpha Corey actually meant every word he said. The man was in full alpha mode. Nick realized, he was suddenly treading on thin ice with the man. Okay, so I am getting her history is that bad, then why don't we do this the alpha way? Let's treat Lucinda as though she is your own daughter and organize an alliance between our two packs. That way you are assured of her safety. You can even put in a no marking or mating by force clause. Nick watched as Alpha Corey sat back and really thought about it, long and hard it seemed. It was a good 10 minutes of silence before he finally nodded. All right, I actually think that might help you out. She's not going to like it though. Nick nodded. Yeah, akin to being sold off, I know, but I am her fated mate. It's not like I'm some alpha who took a look at her wolf and has chosen her and she has no say in it. She knows the goddess picked me for her mate as well. Got to be some room to move there, right? I don't much like it myself. Would rather her just come willingly. Of course, it will just take time for her to come around to it, right? Maybe. Alpha Corey nodded. I'll need some others in on this, do you mind? Nick shook his head. No, let's get this sorted out, or start to at least. It might take a day or two. That's fine. Nick nodded. He knew alliances couldn't be just worked out in minutes. This agreement might be about his mate, but he was going to get a proper alliance out of it as well. Though this pack was 5 hours away, it would be nice if he or his men, when out this way, had somewhere safe to stay. The rest of the audiobook will be continued in the next episode. Join us on Patreon for early access or more great audiobooks. A link is provided in the video description.